Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Today we take a look at a transportation show, really, and in the beginning of the show you saw some old footage of an old sternwheeler. We're going to bring you all of that footage tonight because it's the sternwheelers on some of the inland lakes of British Columbia we're going to talk about today, but not all the lakes.
No. We're talking about the major inland lakes in the West Kootenay district. And this is very important because the West Kootenay district, and I must set the scene here, Mike, in the 1880s, 1890s, was the mecca for mining men all over the continent. There was silver, there was gold, there was copper, mostly the former two, silver and gold.
Yeah.
And in that particular area, there were four major lakes. One was Kootenay Lake, very important. The other was a smaller lake called Trout Lake, which was also quite important. Third one is a small lake, that's Slocan Lake. It's pretty important. Then we have farther to the west, the Arrow Lakes, Upper Arrow Lake and Lower Arrow Lake. So these are the four lakes we're concerned with, and the reason we're concerned with it is because it was a part of an economic strategy on two magnificent and gigantic corporations. On one hand, on the Canadian side, was the CPR, Canadian Pacific Railway. They had the Transcontinental Line going right across from 1885, and they wanted to finger down into that mineralized country. They felt that they could get the bulk of the ore handling capacity and make themselves a very, very good profit. But opposing them on the American side of the line was a Canadian, a guy called the Empire Builder,
Yep.
James Jerome Hill. One of my favorites, always has been. And he thought, and he built the Great Northern with his own money, Mike, didn't accept a penny from anyone else, and he was going to finger into that Kootenay country, and he was going to get the bulk of the ore shipments.
What a perfect conflict going on here.
We're poised for a battle.
Okay, so in the 1890s, along comes the CPR. The one way to do this is to put the lake boats on,
Sure.
and the we don't have a Great Northern flag,
No.
but we've got a CPR flag, and this one, it's just a beauty, red and white.
Yeah.
It flew beautifully. What's
Yeah.
the story behind behind the configuration?
Well, surprisingly, a lot of CPR people don't know, but a CPR man, an old CPR man, told me, he said, Bill, when you look at the CPR maps of the turn of the century and just prior to the turn of the century, all the CPR lands are colored in red. And he said they got every second section. So he said the white is Canada, the red is CPR section, white is Canada section, CPR section, Canada section, CPR section. That's the CPR flag, and they flew it with great pride on all those lakes and river steamers.
All right, take a break here. We're going to come back in just a second and start looking at the lakes and the boats on the lakes of the interior. It's really a great story. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee talking about the sternwheelers of some interior lakes. First of all, I guess the Kootenay Lake was one of the first, and we're talking, what, 1890s, the mid-1890s?
Yeah, mid-1890s, even earlier than that, but by the time the CPR get in there and then the Great Northern, it's mid-1890s to late 1890s, and the prize was really quite impressive. You started with Nelson, of course, and you started with the Silver King mine on Toad Mountain, and it was spewing out gold and silver in almost an unceasing stream. Then you run up the lake on the west side, you get to Ainsworth, and you get the Mile Point, and you've got the Let It Go Gallagher, and scores of other mines producing silver. Then right directly across the lake, you have the old Bluebell.
Oh, yeah.
And that's at Ryandale, and this becomes one of the great mines. This was the mine that the Indians called Chickaman Mine, which was essentially Metal Mountain.
So pure, the lead was almost pure there. You could form your
sure.
musket balls right
yeah.
out of the mountain ore.
And indeed they did. And then you go up the lake on the west side again, and you come to Caslow. And this was a town that really came into its own in the early 1890s. By 1893, it's much bigger than Nelson, Mike.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, it had about 3,000 people. Nelson had about 600 or 700 at that time.
And it was the supply point, the jump-off point for all Sandon and Zinkton and
Sure. silvery Slocan, Mike, the Slocan range. And the silvery Slocan they thought was going to take the place of the Coeur d'Alenes. It didn't, but there were some great mines in that area, the Rico and the Payne, and a number of other mines were shipping out ore into Kaslo, and each one of these great companies wanted the prize.
And these mines were running for some time. This wasn't flash in the pan kind of stuff like it was with placer gold in the West. These lasted a little longer.
Oh, sure. Some of them produced millions and millions of ounces of silver, with a byproduct in some cases of gold if they're at the higher elevation, and sometimes not. But what happened, of course, the only way to get into that country easily, with the exception of the Kaslo and Slocan Railway, was to use the Sternwheeler fleets and use those lakes that ran north and south. So on Kootenay Lake, of course, you had a number of ships that came into being there, the Kokanee and the Kootenay, or the Kokanee, and the Kaslo and the Moyie. The Moyie, of course, is the most well-known now, but at that time it really wasn't. The Kokanee was probably, I think, one of the finest boats on the lake. There's not much doubt about that at all, Mike, that in those early years, it was fast. It did about 18 or 19 knots. And when it was raced, and they did race. For instance, there was a race between the Kokanee and the Kuskook a number of different times.
And they weren't even on separate teams. They were both CPR boats. It was just showing off, eh?
That's right. And every time, I don't think there was an exception. Kokanee won every time, hands down.
This shot is just beautiful because it just shows it. And the guys on board, what are they, hooting and whistling, or is it a serene, sort of sedate kind of?
They're pretty serious about that. They're pushing those boats as fast as they can go. And it didn't just happen in the Kootenays, it happened all over British Columbia, sometimes with disastrous results.
I've seen ones with holes in the side where the boilers blew up and...
Sometimes it blew the boat to smithereens. Not on Kootenay Lake, fortunately. There was an accident on Kootenay Lake when the city of Ainsworth went down off the east shore of Kootenay Lake in a very, very heavy storm and a cold, cold night in that Kootenay country. 9 lives were lost. That was the major accident, really, Mike, between all those years that the Sternwheelers ran on Kootenay Lake.
Now, the city of Ainsworth was one of the odd ducks out of this. I mean, in addition to the CPR and the Great Northern, the city of Ainsworth was a city-owned boat.
Sure. Number of individuals tried to challenge the two giants. By the way, generally unsuccessfully, because the CPR, they really did everything right. They flew the right sort of flag. They had linen and they had hardwood and they had everything going for them.
We've got some china and we've got some silver right here, as a matter of fact.
Sure.
And even though this was working stuff and they were hauling ore and hauling miners, they still said, give them the good stuff.
First class.
Look at this, and this is China with the insignia up there, and there's the flag on it.
Sure.
I always remember to make the red in the center up. I'll always remember this now. Let's see, I got a soup bowl over here somewhere, and it's likewise, it's got a, I'll be very careful here. Bill is always accusing me of trying to break his artifacts.
You haven't yet.
And there's that, and it looks like a belt around the outside and a little wrist. Do you know what that was about?
That was typical of the day. That's 1890s, 1900 stuff.
Okay, I'll give that to you. Now, and the silver, here, do you want some soup? Please take that. And this is the kind of silver that they had right on the table.
Yep.
And each of the pieces of silver, sorry cameraman, has got the insignia of the CPR right in there. And it's got a heft to it like only silverware can have. Sure. And it wasn't just your plain old butter knife, it had some panache to it. And they had this on all of their boats, not just the big snazzy ones.
All of their boats, yeah.
That is really special.
Yeah, it really is quite special.
And when they hurtled up the lake, is this one I should use at this point?
That's from the Great Northern, actually. Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Now, I would imagine that these kind of artifacts are hard to come by because they're biodegradable. They disappear. But this particular one shows that you're going Kaslo to Nelson.
Yeah, that's over the Kaslo and Slocan Railway. From Sandon right to Kaslo, then you pick up the Sternwheeler, and that's a Great Northern Sternwheeler. So they've made that connection between the railway they owned, and now they're going down the lake to Nelson.
Like interconnected flights. This was a well-planned operation.
You bet.
I got a paper here, which is also really very interesting. The Sandon Standard. Is this the one I want? No, this is the one I want down here.
Yeah.
And when you open it up, of course, every good paper has got a little something for everybody to read. And as I open it up, I notice timetable. The SS Archer, that's one you didn't mention, and the SS Lardo.
Yeah, I remember
the running time between Arrowhead, Beaton. Oh, this is on the Arrow Lakes.
Yeah.
And so you read the newspaper, tells you all about the connections.
Yeah.
Gee, it's nice to have a paper like
that's
this.
That's the Lardo Eagle.
And there's the Canadian Pacific. Reduced rates east September 29th and 30th. A little everything
I like their
happening.
masthead, Mike. I think it says all the news to fit the bill. It fits the bill or something.
That's it. It fits the bill.
That's a pun on the bill.
And
of
it says
Eagle.
the Eagle's more widely circulated than any other newspaper, North Kootenay, and it'll be found excellent advertising medium.
Petty Piece was exaggerating.
Was he exaggerating?
Oh, yes, he was indeed.
A thin rag at best of times. So the Moyie, which was an 1898 boat,
Yep.
and it is the one which is at Caslow right now.
Oh, yeah, it has been preserved. And the people of Caslow have done a marvelous job of preserving it. The Moyie is a typical workboat, sternwheeler, plied the waters for over half a century, and is there and preserved in Old Caslow, which is a very colorful town. So now we move, actually, from Kootenay Lake, and we move just north of Kootenay Lake, and we move into that Lardo country. And, the Lardo country is very interesting because there's one major lake, and there's really only one city right on the lake, and that's Trout Lake City. And there were several boats that went into Trout Lake City, but the most famous, I think, was the Victoria, and it was strictly an ore-carrying boat. Because down at Girard, there was a little railway that came up there, and the boat left from Girard and went right up the lake towards Trout Lake City, and the ore came down from the Silver Cup mine, or it came down from the Nettie L. Nettie L was essentially gold mine. Yeah. Silver Cup was a massive silver mine, and a number of other properties all through that country up there.
And how much commitment was, the CPR obviously put a lot of effort into this because it was the connecting between its railway link and this. Were there multiple crews? Was it a big operation? Lots of people aboard them?
Well, I can't say that happened. There certainly was in the Kootenay Lake area. When they launched a ship, there were thousands of people out to see the ship launched. Yeah. This was not the case in the Lardo country. Lardo country is still back beyond,
Yeah,
even today. Oh yeah, marvelous country. If you want to get out from everything, Mike, you go into the Lardo. And now, so we've been on Kootenay Lake, and we've taken a look at Trout Lake. Now you go over the Slocan range, and you go into Slocan Lake. And this is really a fascinating part of this whole scenario of history in the West Kootenay country, because in Slocan Lake you have three famous towns, and some people will say four, but I say three. Certainly at the bottom or the south end of Slocan Lake you have Slocan City, and a real comer in the 1890s, and that's where the Slocan, now there was a number of boats on Slocan Lake, but the SS Slocan was the most well-known of all. And then you go up the lake, and quite a stormy lake, very deep lake. And you go up the lake, and on the east side of the lake, first you come to Silverton. And that's the old Standard Mine, and George Aylard and all these fascinating bunch of individuals went into that area. And then you go into what I think is one of the finest towns in that part of the Kootenay country.
To this day?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's New Denver. And New Denver is really quite picturesque. I regret the loss of the Newmarket Hotel, which burned down just about 20 years ago now. But it still has a nice mood, nice feel. Mm-hmm. And so the Slocan, the SS Slocan, it plied the waters of Slocan Lake for many years. And it again, carried ore out down to the railroad, but carried machinery back in and supplies and passengers and all the rest of it. Nice. When the Kootenay country was really humming.
That's right. And when you go back there today, as you say, New Denver's still a town that sort of captured in time, and you can just about imagine the boats on the lake, the Sternwheelers on the lake.
Yeah, New Denver was called by the late Robert Thornton Lowry the Lucerne of Canada, and I can understand that. You see the glaciers across the lake and the pristine waters of Slocan Lake, and of course Carpenter Creek coming down through the gorge, and the high country beyond that. Very nice indeed. Now we come to the fourth lake, Mike, and the fourth lake, when I was a kid, was, I considered, the last accessible wilderness in North America. And at that time there were no dams on this lake, and that's the upper Arrow Lakes and the lower Arrow Lakes. And you get all sorts of little towns all along that stretch, right from Robson, Fauquier.
That was at the southern end, where the Keenly Side Dam is now, is Robson.
Right near Castlegar.
Yeah.
And then you had other little towns like Fauquier and Needles and Edgewood, and bigger towns like Nakusp, and then of course you ended up at Arrowhead. And this was really quite a fascinating. It was on the edge, really on the edge of the ore-producing zone. So this was a different sort of thing. When the CPR finally realized that they'd won the war as far as getting the majority of the ore, but then they came into another plan. Okay, the second plan was the ore is now depleting itself, which it was by the 1915, 1920 era. They said, okay, we're going to turn this into kind of an equivalent to Banff and Lake Louise.
This was so beautiful that
yeah.
they felt the world would come here.
Staggeringly beautiful country. You just never forget those images. When I seen Nakusp back in the 1940s, when I was a kid, I remember I was about, I think I was 11 years old, Mike, and I said, oh my heavens, what a beautiful town. And Nakusp was really out of this world. It was just one of those picturesque, typical little Kootenay towns, and it was very, very tough to beat.
Does that account for the fact that even though it was on the western edge of the mineralization, that they had the Bonington, which everybody, and I was born in Nakusp, and I remember our relatives saying, the Bonington is the most amazing place. The Minto, which lasted forever.
Yeah.
And some of these boats
Sure.
were part of their society.
The Bonington was the queen of the lake. The Roslyn was a workhorse, as was the Minto. But if you ask people in that Arrow Lakes country that are over 60 years old, they will say, only the Minto counted. And it's really true. The Minto was one of those boats beautifully cut. It traveled, Mike, it worked for about 57 years. And it traveled at least 2.5 million miles. Now, that staggers the imagination. And it traveled, and any time somebody would signal, the Minto would push ashore and pick up, whether it was a couple of boxes of apples, because they did grow apples and that,
yeah.
or whether it was some other produce, they would go ashore. But the Minto, unfortunately, didn't meet the fate of the Moyie. And the Moyie, of course, is preserved to this day. The Minto, unfortunately, ceased running in the 1950s. And when it ceased running, the CPR offered it to the people of Nakusp for $1. And there weren't enough people at that time interested. And Nakusp is an historic town.
It was kind of a depressed time at that time.
Yeah, it was. And so some salvagers from Nelson bought it for $750. And up in Galena Bay was an old man called John Nelson. And old John Nelson loved the Minto. And he wasn't a wealthy man. But he scraped together, and by the way, by the time he scraped it together, they had stripped this. Mind you, I got some of the stuff they got off it, which is fortunate. They had stripped the vessel of most of the brass and all the fittings and everything else. He reached into his back pocket, took the last of his savings, $800. This was about 1957 because they'd bought it in 56. And he tried to restore it, and he pulled it up on the stays on his land near Galena Bay. But when the Arrow Lakes was flooded, old John passed away, I believe, in 1967, in November of 1967, if I recall correctly. And in 1968, August the 1st of 1968, the government had the boat burned to the waterline in kind of a Viking farewell, which was too bad because it was a boat that I think that deserved a better fate.
Tremendous. You mentioned you got a couple of the artifacts from there, both running lights. This would be the one for port because it's a red and all done in brass, of course, and beautiful. And the glass just looking beautiful.
And that was once on the Minto. Very little left from the Minto.
On the Minto itself, and of course the starboard one is a nice green color. And this boat, like I remember my parents saying, the Minto, you know about the Minto. The Minto carried everybody. It went up and down the Narrows, which was a pretty tough thing between the lakes. And it served the people well. Yeah.
And L.S. Morrison caught the last run of the Minto, which is very, very fortunate. He was, I think, very far-sighted indeed. And you see the Minto in action in the last film of his.
Now, this is true. When you see that, and it's steaming through the mountain pass, and the lakes there, and the color of the leaves, don't you wish it still could be? Don't you wish they could still have a Sternwheeler on one of these lakes?
If you have regrets, that's one of my regrets.
That's the one disadvantage of being born a little bit too late. We never got to experience that.
Very true.
Did you ride on them ever? Do you remember?
No, I didn't. I had a chance to ride on the Minto, and I didn't for some reason. I was busy. I was, and I was there.
Yeah. 2.5 million miles.
Yeah.
And 57 years on the lake.
57 years on the lake.
And was it the CPR the whole time that carried it? Yep. So it obviously turned a bit of a profit. It paid for itself.
Sure it did.
All right. We're going to take a break here. Be back in a second with more of Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. An oversight which we just discovered in the break. We forgot to mention the largest boat on the Kootenay Lake, the Nasookin.
Yeah, George Claudius Nelson will never forgive me if we didn't mention the Nasookin, and it was a beauty. Sister ship, probably slightly larger, largest sternwheeler in British Columbia, slightly larger than the SS Sycamoose, which is still berthed in Penticton, by the way.
So we'd be able to get a feel for what the Nasookin was like
Sure.
by looking at the Sycamoose down there. Beautiful big boat.
Oh, yeah.
Now, all of these things have disappeared, and the town's disappeared too.
Sure.
You already mentioned Arrowhead once. Tell me about the potential for treasure in Arrowhead.
This is a bit out of the ordinary for us, Mike. Arrowhead came into being just after the turn of the century and was not a mining town. There were some mines fairly close by, and it was just south of Revelstoke on the spur line to Arrowhead and on the Sternwheeler route as well. And it had, as I say, 400 or 500 people, a number of hotels. Had a very, very disastrous fire on July the 12th, 1906. And that burned about 2 city blocks, but it recovered and was really quite a striking town. But when the floodwaters of the dams that were put on the Arrow Lakes came up, this town was inundated. So it became really a vanished town, one of the vanished towns on the Arrow Lakes. And I find it interesting because it had about over 1,000 feet of boardwalk. And I do know that in those years, in the 1960s, people generally did not screen the boardwalks. And I think, and it's still, of course, the boardwalks are all underwater, and they're probably gone, but where they were would still be there, and certainly the coins under those boardwalks would still be there. So for some enterprising skin diver, by the way, who should document everything,
yeah.
I think there are probably 6,000 or 7,000 coins down there, still waiting you figure 6 or 7 coins per foot on a boardwalk usually in any reasonable town.
You've done a census on this,
I have
you?
Indeed, in Rossland and Sandon and various other places, yeah.
So 6 or 7 coins a foot,
Yeah.
1,000 feet of boardwalk,
Yeah.
6 or 7,000 coins
Should be.
potentially down
Yeah.
there. And these would be more valuable from just the fact that they came from here, because they'd
Sure.
be dimes and nickels and quarters and things. But there
Sure.
would be an occasional gold piece in this, do you think?
Yeah, but usually when a person lost a gold piece, unless they were
They tore up the
inebriated,
bowl.
they took a pretty hard look for it. I picked up gold pieces, but not a lot.
You know, when you take a look at that country and when you take a look at the Arrowhead, the locomotives going by, you can see where the water came up to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the new margins of the Arrow Lakes is now. And
Sure.
all you have to do is go down. It would only be, what, 10, 12 feet down?
I don't know the precise height, and I'd hate to state exactly what it is with
Yeah.
any preciseness because I can't. But I don't think it's very far down.
You know, one of the most wonderful things about this program is seeing the gentleman's film from Penticton. I mean, that is a treasure because although there should be film of the Arrow Lakes on the Okanagan Lake system, there's no film of the boats on the Okanagan.
No, not that I know of.
Yeah. And it's just tremendous to have that kind of an artifact for us to look at.
Real gem.
Okay. Got another. Where's the brass plaque? Where did this plaque come from?
Well, that came from the Kootenay, West Kootenay country. One of the captains on one of the Sternwheelers, and I would have to check Affleck's book, Sternwheelers, Sandbars, and Switchbacks, to find out exactly who it is. I haven't done it yet because I can't find my copy.
Captain M. McLeod, and that's one of those good substantial pieces of brass that doesn't exist too often, and a permanent reminder of that. Got another couple of things. These would be, knickknacks were a lot better made in the old days, have you noticed? And this hand-painted of the Caslow, British Columbia, and look, they just put
1897, Mike.
gold leaf on things.
Yeah,
and everything.
1897. Picked that up, bought it down in the States, brought it back into Canada where it belongs.
Good work. Fascinating story.
Oh, yeah.
The Sternwheelers of the Kootenays we talked about today. Kootenay Lake, Slocan Lake, Trout Lake, and the Arrow Lakes. And
West Kootenay,
and the West
specifically.
Kootenay. Yeah. I wish I'd been able to remember the Minto. Apparently was on it as an infant, but can't remember.
Yeah, too bad.
Thanks very much. That's all the time for Gold Trails today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.